What's up, everyone? Welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show with me, your host, Tara Roberts. This is the official mailbag show for Player Profiler. It is Wednesday, July 15th. If you are watching live, I apologize. I was quite late. Unfortunately, I had some login issues, but it's all good-ish now. We're good to go. I'm here, you're here. Let's go ahead and get started. I've got some mailbag questions for us to go through, some fun ones, I think. But before I do that, I do want to touch on the little news that came through. It is little, but news nonetheless here on Alvin Kamara there. Alvin Kamara working out a reworked contract with the Saints and staying there. I have been under the assumption that he was going to stay because if you remember last season when we were all clamoring for him as one of these hot trade candidates and saying we would love to see Alvin Kamara somewhere else in a high-powered contender, get those receptions up because they really weren't there last season, right? As we were all debating the trades and, NFL analysts were debating the trades as well, he came out and flat out said that if a trade were to be proposed, you would find him somewhere sipping pina coladas. To me, that meant the man refuses to leave New Orleans, right? And if he were to be said, hey, we're going to trade you, he would just retire. So I was working under the assumption that he apparently just loves New Orleans, and I don't blame him. I mean, if you've been to New Orleans, right? The food, why would you want to leave? That's his home, apparently. So he just doesn't want to play anywhere else. He's a Saints for life. Good for him. That means that we do now have to work him into this whole Saints situation here because, as you guys know, I love the Saints' potential this season with what we saw in the back half of last year with Tyler Shuck. Obviously, Chris Olave being taken to another level with Tyler Shuck and the addition of Jordan Tyson there. What is obviously very noticeable is that we had, unfortunately, zero production from the running backs. They're tried, the running backs tried, but at the end of the day, it just wasn't working. Half the guys were practice squad. They're like clear backup running backs there, unfortunately. Once Alvin Kamara went down, and then even before then, Alvin Kamara was really just kind of mediocre and looked like he hit a wall. And within the context of Kellen Moore's offense, there just wasn't a ton of receiving upside for him as well. It was like the worst that we have ever seen from him from a receiving perspective as well. So with all of that said, I know that people have a lot of hesitations regarding Travis Etienne. I understand those. I expect he will drop an ADP. I will be dropping him for sure in rankings. And quite frankly, I'm not going to lie here. I have not been clicking the draft button on Travis Etienne this offseason. Sorry, buddy. Yeah, I love you. But that just he hasn't been a player that compels me, right? You're either drafting guys before him that you feel super good about, those clear RB1s, or you're waiting and saying, like, I want a Cam Scatterbo, right? I want something that at least has some pop, some upside, right? Some potential there in a run-heavy situation. And so while I love the addition of Travis Etienne for the Saints, right? And for Tyler Shuck, from a fantasy perspective, it was nothing that ever really inspired me. So this doesn't change a whole lot other than the fact that I'll be dropping him back. And all that does is, unfortunately, raise up all those other guys that I want to target in fantasy drafts. So that's kind of that's the aspect that sucks about it, is that now all of our guys are going to be bumped up in terms of ADP, because uniformly, as I'm going through social media, it's very clear everyone is dropping him in rankings. So there's not going to be a lot of controversy in that. I will say this, though, because I am seeing some people saying, oh, we've got value on Alvin Kamara. Pause on that and be very careful. Because when you look at Kellen Moore, right, look at what he did in Philadelphia with Saquon Barkley, who is a prolific pass catcher, who can be a prolific pass catcher, right? True 3-down back. We saw the potential that he has in terms of massive receiving upside in New York, right? We didn't see that in Philadelphia under Kellen Moore. Now, obviously, he spent time with, Dallas and the Chargers, and he's always had a bevy of talented pass catchers, right? But ultimately, the offense really doesn't run heavily on pushing volume through running backs. So in terms of reception. So I hesitate for you, especially considering we didn't see him even when he was a lead back being very productive with receptions. I don't think there's any kind of sneaky value there. Don't mess with it, right? And obviously, if we were to have him used on third downs exclusively, and by the way, the Saints have not said that. I see the knee-jerk reaction of people being well, now Travis Etienne is not going to play third downs. The Saints haven't said that, right? Would theoretically there be third down work taken away from him? For sure, right? Logically, they would want to use Kamara in some capacity. But don't assume that it's all of a sudden going to be this complete, well, here's the early down and here's the third down, right? Let's actually hear from the Saints and see what they're doing. Because at the end of the day, if Alvin Kamara had no intention of leaving, his contract was healthy or hefty, they had to rework something, right? So don't take this as an indication of now there's going to be some massive involvement from Alvin Kamara, because really and truly last year he looked rather washed, unfortunately. Hopefully, I've got him on some dynasty rosters, so I would not be hurt if there was something that came of it, but I don't think it's going to happen here. Jumping to the comments here, because I see you right away, and then we will dive into the mailbag stuff. From Mike Inca says, hi, Tara, love the content and the streams. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that so much. Shout out to you. From Falls Junior Indians, I'm in a 3 wide receiver PPR keeper league. I have Jefferson. Ooh, Jefferson with the third. I'm debating CeeDee Lamb or AJ Brown. Actually, this is perfect because one of my mailbag questions was regarding CeeDee Lamb. So I am actually going to go ahead and pull up that graphic right here. Thank you so much there, Falls. Let's talk about CeeDee Lamb. Because honestly, that is if you hear my dog in the background, poor little thing, he's old. He's having like a breathing, little coughing thing right now, but he's okay. Don't worry about him. He's good. He's just elderly. Looking here at CeeDee Lamb, I want to talk about him because I feel like I've been a little harsh on CeeDee Lamb. I've not been clicking the button. I've been saying some things that maybe are a little unkind in terms of his upside here. So I want to talk about him versus George Pickens here. And this is the perfect question to tie it in because you have Jefferson and you're debating on this next option for your pick here with CeeDee Lamb or AJ Brown. I do have CeeDee Lamb ranked higher, right? And the reason for that is because honestly, when you're looking at the quarterback situation and the team situation, we know that we are getting stupid volume from the Cowboys. And I'm hoping for them, really and truly, that their defense has improved. Obviously, they have made moves. Kudos to them in terms of making moves to try and get the defense back to where it was previously. But I still think they're going to push aggressive volume. So kind of when I'm looking at CeeDee Lamb versus AJ Brown, I think it's more of a safety versus a risk thing for you. And I think Pickens kind of will tie in Pickens here as well, because as I pulled up the graphic, I didn't even say it on the podcast. The mailbag question here, CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens at value. So to address Falls Junior Indians questions first, here with CeeDee Lamb versus AJ Brown. CeeDee Lamb is the safer pick, but I personally lean towards the ceiling of AJ Brown because looking at AJ Brown in particular with the Patriots here. Now, obviously, we know that last year, the downturn in production, I know there's, some worry about the information that came out with the whole knee issue, right? But at the end of the day, we know that the Patriots offense lacked the wide receiver one, the true wide receiver one now with Stephon Diggs there. And even Stephon Diggs being there did garner a significant amount of looks. He just didn't do a massive amount with them. The Patriots offense obviously was working heavily off of efficiency. They had an easier schedule. We all know that. This is going to be a much tougher schedule this year. My viewpoint of the Patriots moving forward here is that we are going to see a forced amount of volume pushed up, and they aren't going to be able to rely on that efficiency. We are going to see direct funnel of targets there to AJ Brown. And so I do think there's a lot of upside for him in this offense. Upside that you could potentially see top 10 production, but it is riskier. But looking at CeeDee Lamb, it's still a very safe pick. So if you want to go with the safer option for you specifically because you have Jefferson, and obviously we have the worry about the quarterback situation. Kyler Murray, we want him to win the job there, and hopefully that'll get everything right. But it does make Jefferson a little riskier. So you probably want to tie in CeeDee Lamb as the safer option because looking at CeeDee Lamb's production last year, right? It did come down significantly. Big issue for me is that there was no, he didn't have a single top 10 performance last season, right? And the drop in touchdowns was highly concerning. So it's very clear that George Pickens did take the cap off of CeeDee Lamb's upside, unfortunately. But the good thing here, and what does make CeeDee Lamb a relatively safe pick, I just don't love it because of the fact that it doesn't have a massive ceiling with George Pickens there. But as a fairly safe pick, the good thing is that if you kind of look at CeeDee Lamb's season and you take away the games where he played he had one game where he played less than 10% of snaps. You don't want to include that. He had 2 games where he played less than 50% of snaps. We know that he was dealing with injury issues. So all things equal, if you remove those 3 games right there and then figure out what the average targets were over those games, he averaged nearly 10 targets per game in those games where he did play his full snap count there. So theoretically, the man did not see a drop in targets, right? With the addition of George Pickens, he just saw a drop in touchdowns, and yardage kind of dipped a little bit as well. But overall, we didn't see a decrease in the actual usage of him from a target perspective. And obviously, a lot of that has to do with the Dallas defense being terrible. So they were pushing aggressive volume. So when you're funneling it through specifically, you don't have a heavy pass catching running back there. And Javonte, he catches, checkdowns, but not super prolific on that end. So it really is just funneled between those 2 receivers and CeeDee, Pickens, and then obviously Jake Ferguson. So the volume should be there. I do trust CeeDee Lamb to be very comfortable in terms of consistently pushing those double-digit target range. You just have to know that ultimately that top 5 upside that he had is probably capped, unfortunately, if we get a full season from George Pickens. So not a big deal, right? Safe pick for you. That is the direction that I would go. And then as far as the mailbag here, right? George Pickens versus CeeDee Lamb at value. We're overpaying for both of them, right? We do need to recognize that we're probably paying, we know, more than likely CeeDee Lamb is ranked wide receiver 5 here. That's probably not going to change. I do, when I look at him versus the receivers being drafted after him, they all have massive issues, right? We quarterback issues between guys like Drake London dealing with who's his quarterback and can his quarterback actually get him the ball. We know Michael Penix can. What are we going to get with Tua if Tua is the starter? I would expect to see both of them potentially at some point. If we're looking at Nico Collins, that C.J. Stroud is not pushing massively aggressive volume there. And obviously, consistent offensive line issues. Their defense is good, so they don't push a massive amount of volume. You've got, Chris Olave there as well, has got the, quarterback mystery. Is Tyler Shuck going to be able to repeat what he had last year? We talked about A.J. Brown. So really and truly, CeeDee Lamb has that higher ranking because he is such a safe pick, right? It's kind of justified, even though the upside isn't there that we would like to see from him previously, right? George Pickens, though, is obviously a much riskier thing. The difference between the two for me is, again, if you're in your typical league, you want to play it a little bit safer here. You go with CeeDee Lamb as the better value because even though you are spending essentially a borderline round 1 pick on him, more than likely round 1 pick on him, round 2 if you have a lot of guys pushing running back in your league, right? You would get maybe CeeDee Lamb at the early 2nd round turn. But George Pickens is going to give you those boom weeks, right? He had that ceiling that CeeDee Lamb didn't quite have, right? That top 5 production that CeeDee never got to last season. But unfortunately, that top 5 production does come with a lot of downside in terms of the targets might not be as consistent for him. Obviously, we want him to get the touchdowns in order to get to that top 5 production. And when we don't get that, combined with a little bit less targets than CeeDee, which, again, perfectly fine. He had 137 targets, not a major issue, right? But just a little bit less than CeeDee. He doesn't have that same safety level floor. So you do get those wide receiver 30, wide receiver 40 weeks. And that is hefty at cost, especially because a lot of the guys being drafted around him are definitively the wide receiver 1s of their team. So my preference there is CeeDee Lamb, even though it's a heftier price, just because Pickens is the riskier asset. If you're playing in a big league or obviously best ball, then obviously that potential boom there from Pickens is very appealing, but they are both very hefty in cost. Seriously. AG Lowe says his or her preference there is CeeDee. Going back here to the comments here, Henry Odom says, hey, Tara, I am torn between the consistency of St. Brown versus the lack of competition with JSN. Help me out, please. Ooh, I would love to. I feel very good. So for me, again, we're kind of on the subject of wide receivers here. For me, I feel very comfortable with the top 4. That is my safety spot. If I'm picking in round 1, my choices are I'm grabbing one of those guys. Obviously, if you've got one of the early picks, Bijan and Gibbs, whatnot. But when I'm sitting here and I'm looking, St. Brown is my cutoff. I feel very good about him. The consistency that you're talking about is really key there. A guy that finishes as wide receiver 3 over and over and over again. I mean, you can't argue with that. It feels good. Also, key here and why I do like him a lot this season. Jameson as well and Jared Goff. And obviously Gibbs, right? God, you like everyone there. How can you not? Sam Laporta, odd man out just because of the unfortunate, being 4th in the pecking order of targets there. But the thing here with St. Brown that gives me a little bit more confidence in him, right, is the fact that Jared Goff has a ridiculously awesome schedule, particularly in the back half of the season where we don't have to where there's maybe one game where he is outdoors and maybe questionable-ish weather. But for the most part, he's got a nice string in the back half of the season leading up to the playoffs of dome games and warm weather games. So keep that in mind because back half of the season, I believe, I can't remember if it was back half or the first half. It might have been the first half where Jared Goff was shaky. But regardless, back half of the season is a great lineup for the Detroit Lions in general. So just keep that in mind with them. If you're questioning, St. Brown is a clear smash pick for me in the first round, 100%. But I do give preference to JSN. I do. The consistency is amazing. But, man, while we are having the adjustment in offensive coordinator, obviously, they want to aggressively target funnel targets through Jackson Smith and Jigba. I know people worry about regression there, but at the end of the day, the upside is just so massive. I do go with JSN over St. Brown. But it's very close, and I feel super comfortable with both of them in first round, obviously. But I do give that preference to JSN, but just wanted to give that little shout out to Amon-Ra St. Brown in case anyone was questioning, because like you were saying, he's a very consistent player, but you know that he cannot get you those Puka Nacua numbers on a regular basis, right? He can't get you that Lamar, that JSN. So it's almost like it's a cutoff, but I include Amon-Ra in that tier because of the level of comfort that you have putting him into your starting lineup every single week that you don't get with guys being drafted after him. So love St. Brown, but I do give that slight edge to JSN there. From Hennessy Black, is there a viable strategy associated with drafting 5 to 6 running backs to start the draft or sort of starving out teams in the league? I was able to get Bijan, Chase, Brown, ETN, Scott, Judkins, Montgomery. And then your second comment there was you got Marvin Harrison Jr. and BTJ as your wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2. It is 100% dependent on your league mates. I know that there are certain leagues where if I took that strategy, I would not be able to offload them in the way that I wanted to. So if you have a league where you've got viable trading partners, you want to lean really heavy at one position and then use that as trade bait, starve out the other teams, make them feel like, especially because, again, in terms of top 20-ish running backs, I mean, we feel really good about the depth at running back, and it gets very shaky after that because we've got a lot of running back groups where we have to figure things out. How much volume is Jadarian Price getting? Is Woody Marks going to be the 3rd down back with David Montgomery? Who else is there? Is Bashal Tootin the 3 down back, right? So there's a lot of question marks once you get outside of that, that nice little sweet spot there with Quinshon Judkins, right? As kind of the cutoff point of feelings, or even DeAndre Swift, right? We know what his role is. It just kind of lacks upside, right? But a lot of question marks later. So if you want to take that strategy and fine, and you know that people in your league will absolutely trade and they're not going to be weird about it and try to be cheap or anything or make it difficult. Yeah, for sure. But again, that is 100% preference on what you know about your league mates wanting to trade with you. I wouldn't do it just because I don't like the stress and trying to figure out how to get those trades out of people. But I do think you got very interesting wide receivers there in terms of value, because with Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously we have Trey McBride there, but Marvin Harrison Jr. with Jacoby Brissett, sample size super small last season, but I'm actually very encouraged of a potential. I'm not saying we're getting the Marvin Harrison Jr. breakout, right? But I think the opportunity is there because it's a bad team. They're going to be playing from behind. Jacoby Brissett chucking the ball 40 plus times a game. Very easy there, right? So if we can actually get Marvin Harrison Jr. staying healthy on the field and, like not dropping passes, I mean, which poor thing, he felt so bad about them last season. It wasn't as if he was dropping passes and acting lackadaisical or anything. He literally just looked like honestly disturbed when he was whiffing on passes there. So hopefully we get a better version of him this season, and with a full season, cross our fingers, with a full-ish season of Jacoby Brissett. A nice bounce back there for him. And then BTJ, roll very solid there. Just to touch on the Jags wide receivers a second there. The decreased value that we have now in terms of draft capital that we have to pay there on BTJ, Jacoby Myers, and Parker Washington. Obviously, Parker Washington's has elevated significantly, but I'm comfortable with drafting all three of them, really. Jacoby Myers has really significantly dropped there. BTJ is a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 2 in terms of draft range. I do think he is very guaranteed to be on the field, just because when you look at the alignment, it should be him and Jacoby Myers on the outside, and then Parker Washington, hopefully full-time in the slot, but it obviously depends on how much we see Travis Hunter on offense. But at the end of the day, I think you got some upside there, potential at wide receiver. I don't have the heart to go that deep at running back there, but I totally get it. And then your follow-up there saying you don't like drafting quarterbacks or tight end until the end. You enjoy streaming those positions throughout the season. I agree on that. I do too. I've gotten, if you have the ability to grab an elite option at value, 100%. But I have zero problem streaming tight ends and streaming quarterback as well, especially quarterback this year, guys. We got some depth at quarterback. I actually was just making some show notes for a show I'm going to be doing on Friday regarding quarterback tiers. And the question was, what is your cutoff for a QB1 in a 1 QB league? And honestly speaking, low key, it's like Jared Goff or at the very least, Matt Stafford, in terms of who I would feel genuinely comfortable with as my QB1 in a 1 QB league, because we have a lot of depth and, again, a lot of streaming options. So it's a good point there for sure. Then Hennessy Black says, respectfully speaking, CeeDee took the cap off his own CeeDee took the cap off his own with drops, not Pickens. I think that's true. Well, the touchdowns still dropped too, but yeah, for sure. Targets are there, but the touchdowns there. Yeah, you said he dropped several big touchdowns and balls there. That's a good point there. And then going to, let's see here. Shout out to your Welcome Falls Junior Indian there. Shout out to Jeremy Wilson there. Finally caught alive. Glad to have you here. And then Hennessy Black says St. Brown slightly over JSN safety-wise there. That's interesting. They're both high-volume guys for sure. And then Hennessy Black says drafting Jameson Williams is something you do if you can get him after the 8th round there. Trust Goff over whoever Seattle quarterback is. Yes. And then Linda Wells says, I can't trust diva wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens is like Rihanna and Beyonce. They put on great shows, but never in town when you really need them. That's a beautiful comparison there. I love you on that one for sure. And you do have to, and like Rihanna and Beyonce, you do have to you have to pay a hefty price to see them. So very good point there for sure on that one. Although I will say this, I feel now, granted, we did see a little effort, frustrations last year from Pickens. Nothing too dramatic, but you saw it come through a couple times there. But I honestly think that whatever it is, I think CeeDee Lamb must be a fantastic teammate, right? Because Pickens seems a whole lot. I did not expect him to be okay with playing on the tag. I did not expect him to not be as diva-ish as he was, in previously in Pittsburgh there. So maybe him and CeeDee just really mesh as teammates in terms of CeeDee being able to bring him down a little bit there, and Dak too, since obviously, Dak's pretty level-headed there. So maybe it's just a really good environment for him to be a happier camper than he was in the past. Let's see here. Jeremy Wilson says, Tara, what are good fantasy leagues? I've only done Yahoo for 20 years now. Get on Twitter. Let me think about that in terms of the best place to 100% be able to find a good league. I think Twitter. I think you can find some on Reddit, if I'm being honest. Not that I spend a lot of time on Reddit or anything, but I think that's also a good place to maybe find some stuff too. And actually, let me look that up because, yeah, expand your horizons there. I too have done the Yahoo public leagues in the past there, but it's good to get in a swing of some nice groups that you can repeat with a year after year basis there. So, yeah, let me think about that for you. That would be interesting. Maybe I'll do a post on that. Donald Gillespie says, shout out to his Cowboys there for sure. Chuck Bass in the comments says, with player profiler there, hi, Chuck Bass, says they both got suspended for a drive in breaking curfew to go to a casino, boys for life. There you go. That's it. Perfect. That is perfect there. See, it's a great environment, a little risky environment for them being in trouble, right? But clearly they mesh very well. They're happy campers. They love each other. So CeeDee, great teammate, keeps his boy George Pickens happy there. So at the very least, that gives you some comfort that, the diva level is brought down. They love each other, right? Wolverine says, curious, auction league, would you spend more? Auction league, would you spend more on running backs or wide receivers? Lineup is two running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 wide receiver / tight end, and 1 flex this year. I think running back. Yeah. I am not as heavy on running back as I was last year. I was pretty aggressive, which is and I tend to be a little bit more liberal at running back, but last year I was very staunch on being aggressive in terms of a very clear tier cutoff for me, just because, quite frankly, past a certain point, I did not trust a lot of people to have upside outside of Javonte Williams. Was literally I was cut off hey, I feel good right here. And then Javonte Williams is where I would turn around and feel okay about it. So I'm not as aggressive as I was last year at running back, but I still lean a little bit more towards spending up on running backs this year because there is good value. I was looking at wide receiver rankings, and you can get away with some stuff this season, right? While there's depth at running back, the top 11 options, my cutoff may be there at Derrick Henry in terms of rankings in general. And then after that, Kenneth Walker is where things start to get, I have positive hope for Kenneth Walker. We got to acknowledge that we are searching for a career year for him to pay off at his ADP. So I cut it off right at Kenneth Walker, and everything before that is where I feel good on spending up on money. So I think spending on running backs more to make sure you get one of those top 10, 11, or 2 of those top, or at least one of those top 10, 11 options. And if you can sneak another one in there, money on that one, because we can be a little bit more liberal at wide receiver, right? I was looking across the board at some of the guys, that are wide receiver, mid-tier, wide receiver 2, and a little bit further back there. And there's a lot that have massive upside potential. So I think that's the direction that I would go, is spend up a little bit more in auctions on running back this year. Not as much as last year, but still favorite over wide receiver there. Moving on to the second mailbag question here. Real quick here. Let's stay on the trend of running backs here. TreVeyon Henderson at value is one of the best picks that you can make. Why should we let Rhamondre Stevenson scare us? Oh, the New England Patriots backfield. I have seen about 10,000 arguments in terms of why we should fear Rhamondre Stevenson, why we shouldn't, why TreVeyon is going to eat. I'm not going to lie, I have not been clicking a ton of TreVeyon in redraft leagues. I do have him in Dynasty, so I'm very hopeful that we will be able to get more out of him this season, because it was an excellent rookie season by all means. I mean, all things equal, if we were just looking at the stats, that is rookie stats for a running back, you would be clawing literally to draft him, right? Based off what he put out last year. But I'm not going to lie, there are some concerns here in terms of why Rhamondre Stevenson is slightly scary. Because while he's not slightly scary, he's not scary in the sense of he is obviously not as talented as TreVeyon, obviously not as explosive as TreVeyon, right? But he is extremely reliable. And we got to remember that he was drafted under Josh McDaniels when he was there previously. So Rhamondre Stevenson is one of his boys for sure. And the level of trust that he has in him when the going gets tough, we need increased pass blocking because the offensive line is not as good as we thought it was. They put Rhamondre Stevenson in there because obviously that is a skill set that he has over TreVeyon Henderson. So, obviously Henderson can work on his pass blocking. We know he's an excellent receiver, yards after the catch, amazing, right? But he has to have that reliability and the trust earned with Josh McDaniels there. And he was a rookie last season. We do know that traditionally under the Patriots, rookies have, taken a little bit longer to come along here. So for him to even get that level of volume as a rookie was very impressive here. But my concern here is that when we're looking at why Rhamondre Stevenson became a presence through the Patriots playoff run, right? Despite the fact that apples to apples, TreVeyon Henderson massively outperformed him in season, right? In terms of upside, best games, right? Just taking the top off of the offense. When they got into the playoffs, the regular season schedule was unfortunately a little bit of a cupcake schedule. When they got into the playoffs, much tougher defenses. And that is when you saw the turn to relying on Rhamondre Stevenson. So if we look at the Patriots schedule compared to last season, the schedule is about 10 times tougher in the regular season. So my concern is if we do not have the progression of the offensive line for the Patriots, and they did make some retooling, right, in additions. So we could see a better version of the offensive line because it was a little bit shakier than we would have liked it to be last season. But if the schedule is tough and they need the more reliable back end there, I worry that we could see more Rhamondre Stevenson than we like, right? But you can make the argument that the ADP is not egregious. We know there are going to be touches. Theoretically, the usage should not be as bad as it was in the playoffs. So, yeah, we're still drafting him because the upside is so ridiculously high. But yes, Rhamondre Stevenson should scare us. It should, right? Unfortunately there. I know you don't want him to scare you, but it should give you a little pause there. But the approach that I take in terms of how Rhamondre Stevenson makes me scared of TreVeyon Henderson is that it doesn't make me scared in this fact that I need to full fade him, right? It makes me scared in the fact that I don't want him as my RB1. So if you're looking to invest in wide receiver early, push running back a little further because you're like, okay, we've got good depth here. I could draft TreVeyon Henderson and just go from there. I would not do that. I would look at Rhamondre Stevenson and say, okay, at any point throughout the season, we could see volatility in Henderson's workload. We don't know for sure the level of touches that we will see on a weekly basis here. So that's not somebody that I want to start as my RB1. That's an RB2 situation. So look at it from that perspective. Just, plan your team accordingly. You're okay to still target him, but just be aware the volatility exists. So you want to lock down with one of those higher end guaranteed workload running backs at RB1 and take TreVeyon Henderson as more of a riskier pick with upside, right? Next mailbag question here is, who is the real tier 1 running backs and why is it only Gibbs or Bijan and Gibbs? So, as I said, I've been looking at tiers. And I've seen a lot of interesting takes in terms of Gibbs versus Bijan, right? So the tier 1 in general, right, is Bijan, Gibbs, CMC, Jonathan Taylor, and then it cuts off there, right? Which again, as I've stated before when we were talking about running backs, while those are definitely the tier 1 running backs, it kind of blends in with the other guys as well because there's not an aggressive drop off. So if you have the ability to get a Bijan or a Gibbs with the first or second pick, or maybe someone takes Jahmyr, so maybe you've got a very early pick and you're able to get one of those running backs 100%. But for me, the tier does kind of snap off as a 1A and 1B at Christian McCaffrey because while Christian McCaffrey, again, does have the same upside as Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, my concern with Christian McCaffrey is that, unfortunately, we had a massive, ridiculous workload from him last season where he had over 300 touches, the highest touches total of his entire career, and he's 30 years old. Injury, I'm not saying injury prone or there's guaranteed regression. What I'm saying is that we have seen this man finish as the overall RB1 3 times. 2 of those times, he did not make it halfway through the season. and unfortunately, even a quarter way through the season. And unfortunately, the third time was last year. So history does say that it is extremely risky with CMC this year. So that's why I do cut him off as a little bit separate from Bijan and Gibbs. And then Jonathan Taylor. And I've honestly seen the argument from a lot of people, which I was kind of shocked that people had this view, that Jonathan Taylor is arguably the one that should be at the top of that tier. If we had a guaranteed healthy Daniel Jones that we could, aggressively rely on, sure, maybe you could do that. But at the end of the day, his situation is not the same in terms of the receiving upside. So there's not that safety net that the other guys have. Bijan's offensive situation is not fantastic overall, but there is a certain level to which no matter who the quarterback is, he can't get past, right? Same thing with Gibbs, although he's in a far better offensive environment, right? So those two running backs fit more with the Saquon, Cook, Achane, like kind of area for me, right? But when we're looking at Bijan versus Gibbs, this has been a fun debate that I've seen between people because with the exit of David Montgomery, you're seeing people push Gibbs up over Bijan because of the anticipation of increased workload, which is true, right? But I do caution you just a little bit on that because we did see an increased workload significantly in Jahmyr Gibbs last season. Bijan averaged 2.5 carry, just under 2.5, just around 2.5 carries more than Gibbs per game. So while we would see a increase, not a dramatic increase that would make it just a lockdown, of course, we're going to see such a massive leap that he's a no question take over Bijan, especially because we're not going to see a rise in receiving upside. So keep that in mind, right? David Montgomery was not taking that away. So what we get with Gibbs through the air is going to stay, and we're going to see a little bit of uptick in terms of usage on the ground, but not to the point where he's out there for 100% of snaps. We know that they will be integrating in Isaiah Pacheco as, a little bit of relief there so they don't massively overload him. So for me, Bijan is still the top dog. Gibbs is right there with him, but I get the argument what people are making, but I still love Bijan, especially in the context of Kevin Stefanski's offense. And this is the other thing that I would like to point out. There's a higher ceiling for Bijan. Last year, we did have Zach Robinson at offensive coordinator there in Atlanta, giving touches at the goal line to Tyler Algier over Bijan Robinson. Zach Robinson is gone. Kevin Stefanski, in terms of his usage of running backs, is very straightforward. We should not see Bijan being sniped at the goal line by Brian Robinson at the same rate that we saw from Tyler Algier last year. So for the potential increase in touchdowns for Gibbs, we've got that same opportunity for Bijan as well. So just kind of keep that in mind there. Bruce the Juice says, I like Gibbs over Robinson this year. It's close. I don't blame you on that one. From Beebs in the Trap. Hey, Tara, which best ball tournaments are you entering this year? So I do like to diversify. I had to pause here for a second because I was like, well, hold on there. So I do recommend Fast Draft in terms of it's with Player Profiler, Fast Draft. Best ball tournaments are fun to do all season. And then, of course, I do underdog drafts as well. So that as well. And then I like to do, and I also recommend this to other people, do one-off best balls with your friends. Your little groups, maybe, you've got your dynasty league, maybe form a little offset, or your redraft league, form an offset league where you just do best ball. It's just you guys, and it's not a tournament or anything, just, drafting best ball lineups. And so you're getting more leagues, more opportunities to draft without the pain of having to set a whole bunch of lineups here. So that's also a good way to talk your league mates into doing other leagues as well there. So I will say that as well. So yes, best ball one-off leagues are fun as well. And then Henry Odom says, if you were to draft Swift, would you prioritize handcuffing Manungai? I don't think I would. Just because, so when I'm handcuffing running backs, like, so if I were to draft CMC, and I'm probably not going to draft a lot of CMC, but if I were to draft CMC, right? And I say that I'm probably not going to draft CMC, but I'm not going to lie, guys. Once I start drafting, and things get going, I wonder if any of you are this way, if you do multiple drafts, do you ever get to the point where you're in late August and you start to look around at your teams and you're doing a draft and you're like, well, I mean, I haven't drafted any CMC. I would like a little share. Yeah. You just start making picks, then just like, well, I haven't drafted. I want to diversify a little. I've drafted too much of this and I want to get a little bit of that. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I do that. So it's possible I could. But if I were drafting a CMC, I 100% want to handcuff him because of the known risk with him. With DeAndre Swift, I'm not sure I want to, just because I prefer to target Kyle Monangai as an RB3 to have, because of the massive upside that he would potentially have if Swift went down. He is one of my priority handcuffs, but I don't know if I would tie him with Swift in particular, just because they're a lot closer in ADP than I would like. So I think it might create some funky lineups in terms of you maybe nipping away at your potential upside there for your starting lineup if you have Swift and then you draft Monangai, because Monangai the ADP is elevated, right? And where you're drafting Monangai, there are also startable options at other positions. So that would be my only hesitation, is that you would be handcuffing there, passing over a startable option. And then ultimately, yay, if Swift goes down, you get your 3 down back, massive upside. But I think I would diversify it a little bit more personally, because they're so close in ADP. They're closer than you would ideally like between your running back and your handcuff. So that's my opinion on that one. I do love me some Kyle Monangai this year. Love, 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 love. He's actually I would say that Kyle Monangai is my top priority handcuff in terms of just in general, not directly tied to DeAndre Swift. But in terms of guys that as an RB3, love the fact that he has standalone value. I think it is going to continue to be a 50-50 split. Love the touchdown opportunities. I think Chicago will continue to lean on the ground game there as well. So they were a very run-heavy team last year. I think it went overlooked a little bit there just because we had the 2 separate usage of both Swift and Monangai, but they were run heavy. There's volume to be had there. So standalone value for him and massive upside if Swift goes down. Wouldn't necessarily feel like I have to prioritize handcuffing Swift, but do love Monangai for sure. Good one here from Beebs in the Trap says, I think Tua could give Bijan more receptions like HN. That's a good point. The change in which again, the Atlanta quarterback situation is something that is going to be very critical for fantasy drafts, right? This is the one that makes me, it gives me the most pause there, because I love Drake London, but I am low-key terrified if Tua is the quarterback for Drake London, because obviously we've seen good years with Tua when things were perfect and wonderful and he was supplying Tyreek Hill, much happy camper there, and Jalen Waddle obviously on a lesser scale. But man, it's been a couple of years of suspectness, right? And we do see that, last year he did shift. We're not just last year, right? The aggressive shift towards the usage of Achane, right? The tight ends as well. So I would prefer Michael Penix for the sake of Drake London in terms of, we saw a massive upside for Drake London with Michael Penix in terms of the opportunities downfield, right? Tua always scares me a little bit there from that extent. But if we get Tua as a starter, and quite frankly, looking that way, might be a good opportunity for Bijan. So you're right on that one. I like that little one right there. And then Bruce the Juice says, I do at times. And that was at the, what I was talking about. I saw you make that comment. I just wanted to show it there because I'm glad somebody else also gets towards the end of fantasy season and just starts saying like, I'm just like different shares of people. I don't want to miss out. You just start like clicking away. That's how I always end up with such a sideways league in my family league, because my family league is always my last draft of the season. And I start looking at it like, I think I want to try something new and start doing things that don't make logical sense just because. Big Dan says, hey, Tara, question. What are your thoughts on Saquon Barkley and should I try to draft him? What about Ashton Genty? I like both of them. My preference there is Saquon Barkley. They're very close. I think ECR has Genty ranked higher, but I think it's like back to back there. But Saquon is my preference there. as the Eagles try and figure out this new path forward with the wide receivers, just lean on Saquon. I think that's going to be the direction there. And then we have Sean Mannion coming over from Green Bay. If he is bringing over what he has done with Matt LaFleur over there, the Green Bay offense has relied so heavily on the ground game. Like I was looking at last year they had, Jesus, I don't have it up anymore. But last year, I think they were top 10 for sure in rush attempts and bottom 20 after 20 in pass attempts. The previous year, the gap was even further. I think they were top 5 in rush attempts and then maybe 27th in pass attempts there. So the separation, which is also why I'm a little shaky on Jordan Love, but the separation there in terms of how aggressive they lean on the ground game, the volume that we would have there, I think that we're going to see the Eagles get back to that because that's what made the Super Bowl year fantastic, right? Leaning on Saquon Barkley. So Sean Mannion coming on there just feels like a very good script to get Saquon back into the rhythm and usage that we had before. I do like him for a bounce back as well because as I was talking about before with CMC, excuse me, as I was talking about before with CMC, what we often see with those running backs that have a really aggressive workload the year before is not just regression, right? In terms of efficiency on the ground, stats coming down, and then injury risk as well, whether it's a big one or playing through little nagging injuries. But it's really tough once you have that ridiculous workload to really come back and be the same person you were. And I think that's what we saw with Saquon in 2024. I mean, my God, he had 340 plus attempts, plus the receptions, and that was regular season, then plus the playoff run to the Super Bowl. He had a ridiculous amount of workload, so I'm not shocked he was subpar last season. I do like him a lot for a bounce back. He is my preference. I don't mind Ashton Jeanty. I love the changes that the Raiders, well, obviously, first of all, coaching changes, hello. Quarterback changes, hello. But offensive line change is the biggest thing there. And obviously, it's going to be a work in progress, right? But they made enough moves to make it clearly better than last year. The reception should be there. We know, hey, going back to Atlanta, we talk about Bijan. We know that Kirk Cousins has no problem being able to check down, utilize your running back as a receiver, not an issue there. So there's no reason that we can't see that continued aggressive receptions usage of Ashton Jeanty with a lot better efficiency on the ground with the improved offensive line in general and better coaching as well there. So Jeanty's price tag is hefty, right? But considering the baseline that we had last year with receptions, increased usage on the ground and goal line opportunities, I do feel good about him as a top 10 running back as well. My preference is Saquon though, for sure. Shout out to Famous Jay in the chat saying, hey, Donald Gillespie says, Tara, you're in my ear. Oh, you're in my tier 1 for fantasy host. Thank you, Donald. You're wonderful. I appreciate that. Famous Jay says, Bijan and Gibbs are tier 1. McCaffrey and Taylor are tier 2. And any of those 4 can be my RB1. I agree with you on that one. It's a separation point right there. It's a separation point in terms of safety and trust. Those top 2, they're just on another level. From Bruce the Juice says, Kyren Williams versus Blake Corum. I think Blake can get him, no injury. What about you? This is such a controversial topic. Of all the fantasy topics in the world, the Kyren Williams versus Blake Corum topic is one that evokes the most emotional reactions. I swear to God, the second you say anything about Blake Corum, Kyren defenders come through. I myself I've been a Kyren defender in the past. But I do think that we need to be very realistic about the fact that we saw a very clear shift in the snaps in the backfield. I think that Sean McVay will repeat what we saw in the back half of last season because the workload on Kyren Williams previously in 2024 and 2023, aggressive, right? Very aggressive in terms of snap counts. That's what made him so successful. Volume, always on the field. There were times where he did not leave the field, played literally upwards of 90% of snaps, which is not good, right? And so I think the ability to bring Kyron's workload down a little bit, get him off the field so he's not out there for a ridiculous amount of snaps, and utilize Blake Corum, I think it's going to continue because it's just a smart move for them, especially with the way that their offense functions and the opportunities that they provide as well. So it doesn't make sense to overload your running back that aggressively when you do have a running back and a guy that you can trust in Blake Corum. And obviously, I do think he has earned that trust with Sean McVay. I do not think that he will take over Kyren Williams. I think the trust is too baked in there. The reliability with Kyren, I don't think there's anything he would do to lose the job. So at best, Corum could make it a 50-50, but more than likely, the reality is probably more of a 60-40 split, which is kind of what we saw towards the end of in the back half of last season, right? Makes the most sense, which is perfectly fine because if we have, and we can afford a little regression, it's not that big of a deal. But if we have the same high-powered offense that we saw last season, I mean, it doesn't take but, 8 to 12 touches for Corum to have relevancy anyway. So I think that it's very possible that he offers standalone value on a regular basis there. But at the end of the day, I do think Kyren is still going to remain the RB1, 50-50 split at most. I don't think he's taking the job. I'm sorry. But I do like drafting Blake Corum because of the massive upside if he were to have that opportunity, if Kyren were to go down 100%. From Linda Wells says, Tara, I am so proud of you. You haven't said the name Jacoby Brissett all episode. Keep it up. We sure? I think I did. When I talked, did I talk about, or am I hallucinating? Did I talk about Marvin Harrison Jr. at the beginning of the show? I think I did. I might have said his name. Sorry. I think I said it at the beginning of the show. From Brad James. Hola, Tara. Am I crazy for thinking KC is full of fool's gold this year? I don't think you're crazy to say that. I will not say it's fool's gold. I think that it is the riskiest gold rush that you can invest in, right? But sometimes I like a little risk. I do like a lot of risk. I have been taking a lot of Rashee Rice with the awareness that, hey, at any point in time, he could do something stupid and be done for the year, right? Kansas City is high risk. High risk in this fact that we have one Patrick Mahomes coming off of the injury. He's on track for week 1. I don't think it's an issue. If anyone can just come back and be Patrick Mahomes, it's Patrick Mahomes, right? The elevated P, I will say maybe fool's gold a little bit on Kenneth Walker just because of the elevated ADP. It's hefty. I would be a little bit more comfortable if he were pushed back into mid to low end RB2 range. I understand why it's elevated because the upside and opportunity is there in Kansas City. But I just ask us to realize again that if we're drafting in where he's being drafted as a top 12 back, just remember that you are asking for him to have a career year in order to pay off where you are drafting him, which is probably not an ideal thing to do with somebody that's not a rookie, right? or a sophomore, right? So I have faith that he can be the 3-down back RB1, high upside, 1,400 yards, 12 rushing touchdowns, 40 receptions pushing it? Nah, 40 receptions is, 40 receptions, right? I have optimism that could happen, but man, we're asking a lot, right? So that one is where we probably do need to have a little bit of pause there. And then obviously I talked about Rashee Rice. It's not fool's gold. It's real. If it stays on the field, it's real. It's top 5, but it's got to stay on the field. So it's the riskiest offense that you can invest in too. But I'm not going to lie. I've been enjoying the risk. And if it, and I feel like that's one of those things that I could live with, right? Because it's not, hey, if he commits a crime and is off the field, that's on him. My draft process was correct in his talent in terms of the upside there. If he stays on the field, I love it. Scott Clapkey, I think, is that how you see your name? Says, sorry, I can't see myself drafting Saquon, CMC, or Henry. I'll let my league mates risk the age and mileage. If that's your philosophy, I don't blame you. Not at all, right? Because I definitely hold that point of view with CMC for sure. I don't apply it to Derrick Henry just because I refuse to apply the laws of physics to Derrick Henry because of the fact that he is just such a physical anomaly. If it was any other running back that was his age, like in that situation, it would be like a hard pass. No way. But like, I guess in my mind, Derrick Henry is the running back that will continue to do Derrick Henry things until he opts to retire, right? Like it'll be his choice, not his knees that take him off the field, right? He's just a physical anomaly. But I'm with you there on CMC. I don't think age got Saquon yet. I don't. I think we're getting a bounce back here. Yeah. Because I know there's a few guys that people are worried about because of, down years last year, but I think we're still good on Saquon. So I'm looking forward to the bounce back there with him. And the Eagles were victimized by Kevin Patullo last season. Let's give them a slight pass on that. They were victimized. Beebs in the Trap says, when it comes to best ball, RB combos, do you pick an RB based on RBs already in the team? Example, I have CMC. So I draft, examples. I have CMC, so I draft Tootin over Montgomery for more upside and youth. Yes, 100%. And that's why, I try to be flexible, right? In terms of builds, right? If you're going to take that risk on CMC, shoot for the upside. In case something goes wrong with CMC, shoot for the upside there with somebody else. If you take a safer pick at RB1, something that for a fact is guaranteed workload, guaranteed to hit, take a little bit of risk later. So I play off of, I target running backs and combos based on running backs that I've already drafted on the team. So 100%, I do tend to lean towards that strategy for sure. And then on the other side of the coin from Beebs in the Trap says, I have Achane and then draft Montgomery for stability in my RB room or jack up volatility with Tootin. Yeah. I think, it also depends on what kind of build you're going for. Are you in a tournament where your entire mindset is, I am only drafting volatility here, right? Like I did that in my Scott Fish Bowl with my first 5 picks where I was just like, hey, I'm intentionally targeting volatility, high upside that is extremely risky. So I guess it just, depends on what kind of team you're trying to build. And then varying teams, right? Going with a team that is all risk, one that is more balanced where you have one running back that is risky and then a safety valve option there, like the Achane and David Montgomery. So I like to vary up, take different strategies in terms of trying to get different builds so that I can have a little bit more diversity there. So I agree with that for sure. Let's see here. Brad James says standalone value for Pacheco. I could see a ton of work for the Lions if the Lions are crushing it this year. I've debated this in my head because I would like the resurgence of Isaiah Pacheco. And it's possible, and the debate here is whether or not we believe that, because we saw last year, the Lions intentionally started to minimize the usage of David Montgomery and increase the usage of Gibbs. They said they were going to do it. They stuck to the word. Shout out to Dan Campbell. So the question we have here is, did they decrease it because of that belief so aggressively in Gibbs, or did they see something with Montgomery aging? And Isaiah Pacheco brings in a fresher body for them to get back to more of what they had in the previous years in terms of more usage from that secondary back? Or was it just that they just really love Gibbs, right? And so we're not going to see that standalone value. Because again, I do think he would be a very fine handcuff here. Regardless, and the ADP is perfectly fine as well. I don't mind targeting him just to kind of see. I don't know that there will be the standalone value, right? Because they do clearly want to continue to get, and I don't think we'll see Gibbs push 300 carries, right? Because that just feels a little aggressive. But over the 250 mark for him makes a ton of sense this season. So I don't know about the standalone value there because he would require the goal line touchdowns, right? It probably wouldn't be enough on the ground. But I think it's worth rostering and putting on your bench and seeing for sure. ADP is not a major issue, right? Big Dan says KC running back there with old offensive coordinator. I will say that. I'm happy that we have switched from Matt Nagy to Eric Bieniemy. I feel like there were not just I feel there were happier times. Statistically, there were happier times under Eric Bieniemy. I just with Matt Nagy in general, I think there's a certain ceiling you can get there. And for all intents and purposes, Eric Bieniemy going to be a head coach at some point? No, but he's a fine running backs coach specifically. So I do feel good about that addition of him because that is his specialty in terms of getting the most out of Kenneth Walker there for sure. Index of Suspicion says CMC, aka Marshall John, and then says, "Were you victimized by Kevin Patullo? You may be eligible for compensation." I was victimized by him as as a AJ Brown dynasty owner. I was heavily victimized. It was not right. It was not okay. Good Lord, what a nightmare here. It can't get any worse than what it was with Kevin Patullo. So for as much as people have their criticisms of Jalen Hurts and the break apart there with AJ Brown and whatnot, and obviously the offense just looked terrible last season, the decrease in production, those were still the same people that it was the previous year. The difference there really was, shout out to Kellen Moore, right? In terms of, and the Eagles, it is what it is in terms of them having to go out there and find their new offensive coordinators if they get hired. Shane Steichen, Kellen Moore, whatnot. Unfortunately, they made a poor decision. We know why they made that poor decision in terms of going with Kevin Patullo and trying to be a good friend there to Kevin Patullo, but those times are over. And I like Sean Mannion a lot more, especially for Saquon Barkley. Yeah, that's going to be good. Imagine like the tilt there, which is also what makes me a little bit like the upside is there for Devontae Smith for sure. I have no fear in targeting him. I think the ADP is perfectly fine, right? I do kind of like sit there and wonder, what are we really going to get out of Mekhi Lemon in the context of this offense? Like how in the rookie season, if they're going to lean aggressively on Saquon Barkley, how much consistent volume are we going to, it's going to be a mystery. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be a fun season. It'll be a fun season for sure. But that wraps things up. Love the chat, people. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, sorry I started a little late there, but I will be back next week at our regular time at 8 p.m. EST. Appreciate you all tuning in. As a reminder, because I always forget, make sure that you are subscribed both to me at It's Dare Time and to Player Profiler as well. For, again, remember the Dear Miss Fantasy Podcast. Let me remove the comment there and show my banner there. The Dear Miss Fantasy Podcast is available on all podcast platforms. So appreciate a subscription on that as well. But again, I'll be back here next week, and next week will be fun, guys, right? Next week will be fun because finally we're going to be getting into training camp. Thank God for that. Some action, right? In terms of us getting a little bit of something, a teaser as we head into fantasy season. So we'll be talking about that, I'm sure, as we get kicked off next week. Appreciate you all tuning in. I will talk to you all next week. Have a wonderful week. Talk to you all later.
It's important to me that all of our media be free, but it is you, the premium subscriber, with access to data analysis, the rankings, Dynasty Deluxe, DFS Dominator, the world-famous draft kit. You get that content and you make all of this possible. The free podcasts, articles, NFL draft content. So I must give a special thanks to all of our premium subscribers. You make all of this possible.